Hey everybody! Alright, so we're going to be making our first game in Construct 2. Now, this game is going to be very simple. It has a lot of really cool game mechanics. And what we want to be doing when we make a game is we want to make sure that we get really good game mechanics, because a lot of games are really good and really fun to play that have simple graphics. One thing you want to be doing is if you are first starting out game development, you want to make sure that you are focusing on game mechanics versus anything else at this point. Now, if you're an artist and you really want to make sure that your art is really good, you can do that too, but the best games have really good game mechanics, all right? So in the next tutorial, I'm going to show you what kind of game we're going to be making.
Welcome everybody. Let's take a look at the game that we're going to make here. So let's go and let's take a look at this here. And if I push F5, you can see that the background color changes. Now this may seem really simple, but it's one of my favorite game mechanics. It's one of my favorite design techniques. In addition, when we make the art from scratch in Photoshop, I'm going to show you something called negative space, which again is one of my favorite design concepts. Now, one of the things that you need to know about designing and producing, and it doesn't matter what it is, whether it's games, apps, or whatever, is that it's very common to add things to make to make your game or whatever better. But one thing you can do is you can actually take things away, and what I like to do, and I like to call this, is I like to call it's an additive process. So I call it additive production, which is what you do. You have to actually build it. But if you use subtractive production, you can take items away to make your game simpler. Now this is a little bit more relevant when it comes to app building. You know, if you want to make a mobile app, you take things away to make your app simpler, and that's something that you should be doing, because for your design experience, you want to make sure that it's very, very simple and very easy to understand. And games can have that too. You can have a really complex game, but you can take things away and make it simpler and sometimes even more fun. So let's go ahead and let's take a look at this here. And again, you can see that we have this here, and you have to simply avoid all of these spikes here, and that actually looks pretty good, right? And I'm just kind of moving around, and there we go. And you get the idea, right? And you get the score, and you can go ahead, and um, every time you do this, the background color does indeed change. All right, so let's go ahead and let's make this game. All right, welcome everybody. Let's take a look at how we can make this game here. So, if you've never made a game before, you need to go and open up Construct 2, and what we're going to do is we're going to go to File, New, and here you can see that you have all these different templates here. I highly recommend that you take a look at a lot of these in your own personal time. In fact, a lot of people who are really good at, well, anything creative wise, is they're really good at taking and learning in their own spare time. So, for example, there is a bunch of templates. Take a look at some of these templates here, and once you take a look at these templates, you can see how they work, and you can even expand upon them. But what we need to do is we need to make our own game here. Now you can see that there are empty landscape and portrait projects. If you don't know what that means, a landscape project is where the width is smaller than the height. Think of like taking a picture of a sunset. Now portrait is the opposite. The height is longer or bigger than the width. Now think about taking a portrait of yourself. Okay, so there are several options here. We have SD, which stands for standard definition, and 4:3 is the aspect ratio. Now that is the size of the width or the height relative to the width of the height. So it's the height relative to the width. Okay. Now for example, this video here is 16:9. That's the aspect ratio. So this top here up at the top is 16 to 9. So it doesn't matter what numbers you put in there, it is 16 by 9 here. Now, the other thing is the standard definition, the SD versus HD, the SD have fewer pixels and the entire game is actually smaller. Now, the reason why that is because the smaller the game, the more likely people online are going to be able to play it. Not everyone has the latest and greatest smartphone. As you know, with HTML5, you can run it on any device. So your computer has way more power than your it has way more power than your smartphone. So, having said that, what do you want to do? Which one do you want to pick? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick the SD portrait project. Okay, this way there's not too many pixels to deal with here, and we get the idea. Now, just because it doesn't work on the or it isn't the HD project, so you can make like a really high definition game here. But this game is going to be fairly simple, and the detail isn't necessarily that important for this game. It is the gameplay that we're more looking out for. So let's go ahead, let's double click on that here. Now, this should go and create a project here, and you can zoom out by pushing the control. Now you can see here that there is this little dashed line here, and this dashed line will be what the player sees. Now what we want to do is copy the window size and then paste it on the layout size here, okay? And if you can't see the window size, it's in the properties view, okay? So we have the layout size here, and all that I've done here is that I have just made the background what the player sees here. So there's nothing outside of what the player is going to see here. Now, what we need to do is we need to add in a background. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a sprite. And I'm going to resize this sprite by clicking this button up here. And the width is going to be 480 by 854. Now, why did I choose those numbers? Well, those are the numbers of the actual pixels of the game here. So the size is determined by the amount of pixels, and this just happens to be it here. Now what we're going to be doing is we're going to be changing the background color, and what we'll do is we'll add the first one to be some kind of orange color. Again, for this tutorial, the colors don't really matter that much, but we're just going to go ahead and select a bunch of them. But I'm going to show you how to do that and change the color in another tutorial. This tutorial is all about making sure that our project is set up. Alright, so now we have this sprite here. We can always change the name of the sprite, and you should always change the name of the sprite to something that makes sense. You know, some people use shorthand, and if you're working at a big company, this might be background dash, whatever here. It's plain, simple English, or whatever language you speak, is going to be the perfect here. Okay. Now we're also going to set the position. Now the position of an object is set by the origin, which is that middle block there. So the position is going to be half. Now I happen to memorize half of 480 by 854, which is 240, 427. If you ever feel like pulling out your calculator, there's no shame in that. Okay. So this is going to be the background for now. Let's hop to the layer here, and you can push F2 and change it to the background. Lock it, and the reason why I like to lock it is so that you don't have to if you make a mistake here, you can't move it around. But what we're also going to do is add in a player layer. Okay, and what this is going to do is that all of our game objects are going to be on that player here. Okay, the next thing you need to do is save it, and always save everything to the cloud here. I have and back up my my Construct 2 games to my SkyDrive or OneDrive, and I also back it up periodically to Google Drive, as well as an external hard drive. Okay, so save it, and I'll show you what we need to do next in the next tutorial. Alright, so let's go ahead and let's add in the sprites here. Now, one thing you have to understand is when you're watching these tutorials versus when you're actually making your game by yourself, things might be a little bit different. You might make a few more mistakes. You might need to go back and change some of the steps here. One thing you gotta understand is while you see me make these games for you, the actual process of making games might be a little bit different. But let's go ahead and let's add in our sprites here. Now, generally you want to add in your sprites all at the beginning, but oftentimes you need to add in sprites along the way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a sprite, and for this one here, we're going to make the width 480, okay? And for the height, well, we could probably make that less here, something like, oh, maybe 100, and I think that's probably pretty good. Now let's go ahead and let's change this to an off black here. Now the reason why I like to do off black is that black, if you go to our RGB values, and this is how computers, by the way, deal with, they actually deal with colors here. So it's a value between 0 and 255, and 000 is completely black. So if you type in 10, 10, 10, well, that's an off black. It's not quite there. But my favorite off black is 50, 50, 50. It's this really nice dark gray. All right, and we're going to call this the ground. And we're going to kind of move this somewhere around here. And what we can do is we can change our position to exactly 240, which will place it in the center here. Now, we can either do one of two things here. We can keep this on the player layer, or we can change this to the ground layer. All right, and that way we can lock it and you can kind of move it around, and it doesn't really matter here. But if you want to edit that sprite again, you do have to go and uncheck this little lock here. Okay, let's go ahead, let's add in a player here, and we'll add in a sprite, and we'll maybe make this 40 by 40, and I think that looks pretty good. And let's make this an off-white, which is 250 by 250 by 250. Okay, and that actually looks pretty good. Now the only thing is that you want to make sure that this is on the new layer. Okay, so you want to make sure the new layer is selected, and we can call this the player layer. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's add that in here, and I think maybe we'll take a look at this here, and I think 735 is probably where we want this to go. Now we now have this player here, but what we also need to do is need to add in the touch, so we can actually go and make this work here. So really, this game doesn't really have too many objects here. We have the player, which is going to be manipulated by the touch, and we also need to have our spikes that fall down. So let's add in a sprite, and we'll maybe make the width 10 by, let's say, 150. That's maybe a bit too much. 10 by 100. It's pretty good. And for now, we'll make it the 50, 50, 50 color. I'm pushing tab to go in between those two. If you're wondering what alpha is, that is the transparency. All right. And yeah, I think that looks pretty good. And that's probably a good, nice size here. And what we'll do is we'll call this the spikes, or just spike. And of course, we'll call this one the player. All right. So that works out pretty well. And we now have the spikes. And the spikes will fall down, and the player will move around here. Now, of course, we're going to be going and manipulating these both in Photoshop and adding in our own art. It's simple art, but it is going to work here. Before we move on here, let's go and let's add in the background colors here. So I'm going to go and right-click and add in some frames. And this is going to change the background color. And you'll notice that the frame animation starts at 0. And the reason why it starts at 0 is because it uses zero-based counting. Okay, so let's go ahead, let's add in some colors here. And you want to pick colors that are fairly different. So you don't want to go, let's say, orange and then red, because, well, orange and red are fairly similar. So we'll go something like orange, green. We'll make it kind of more of a darker green like this. And the reason why you want to make it more of a darker green is because the player is white, and you want that player to stand out a bit more. Okay, we're going to go ahead. Let's add in kind of a blue color. That works out well, and maybe kind of a gold color. Yeah, something like that here. And we can go and add in a purple color. Yeah, and I think that works out pretty well. So we need to add in a bunch of, well, logic to make this work, and I'll show you how to do that in the next tutorial.